anti-Semitism. Its goal of destroying the Jewish and democratic state of Israel and its rejection of the very idea of a Jewish state. It has managed to mask its true nature by kidnapping the language of progressive values, of course, which we all share and support, and using that language to promote anti-Jewish racism. This is what makes BDS so dangerous. By hiding behind a progressive mask, BDS has been able to normalize its anti-Semitism and desensitize Western audiences to its discrimination. Friends, I am here today to tear off this mask. We have already exposed the numerous links between BDS and designated terrorist organizations such as Hamas and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Today, we are exposing here BDS anti-Semitism. And let me be clear, BDS is anti-Semitic. It is anti-Semitic in its ideology, in its leadership, in its practice, and in its effects. While not all who participate in BDS are anti-Semitic, some, of course, are just naive, they don't understand who's behind it. We see time and time again how BDS generates anti-Semitic discrimination, employs anti-Jewish motifs, and denies the rights of the Jewish people. Wherever BDS takes root, anti-Semitism quickly sprouts. Our new report details over 80 examples of anti-Semitic tropes, images, and claims made by leading BDS figures. It shows that BDS anti-Semitism takes three main forms. The first is the use of motifs taken from the worst streams of anti-Semitism, Jews as demons and animals, Jews poisoning water, crucifying their victims, and of course, controlling banks and governments. The second form of BDS anti-Semitism is Holocaust inversion, portraying Israel and Jewish Israelis as the new Nazis, comparing them to the ultimate symbol of modern evil. And the third form is the delegitimization of the idea of the Jewish state and of the Jewish people's right to self-determination in any borders. But instead of taking my word or our word for it, just listen to BDS for a second.
People want to kill Jews, but Jews don't behave when they are visiting other people's countries.
He should be the one is ready to be killed.
Who said that?
Yeah, she said that.
Yeah.
This is nothing.
Can you see that?
That's the...
Okay, down Israel!
Stand up to the office! You need a big office, that's what you need!
Definitely, most definitely, we oppose a Jewish state in any part of Palestine. No Palestinian, rational Palestinian, not a sellout Palestinian, will ever accept a Jewish state in Palestine.
Of course, this was Omar Baraghouti, the co-founder of the BDS movement, the BDS campaign. So all of these forms meet the most widely accepted international definition of anti-Semitism that has become an international consensus, the definition of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. You mentioned it, Mr. President, which was also adopted here by the European Council. Today, I call on members of parliament and decision makers throughout Europe. It is time to speak out loud and clear against BDS anti-Semitism. We must have a policy of zero tolerance. Zero tolerance for BDS, zero tolerance for anti-Jewish discrimination. If we want to build a tolerant Europe, we must have zero tolerance for anti-Jewish hate. We are not talking about something theoretical. We've already seen how time and time again BDS leads to anti-Jewish discrimination and violence. We saw in Spain how BDS led to discrimination against Matisiau, a Jewish American musician, not an Israeli. He was singled out just because he is Jewish and told that he couldn't perform until he made a declaration against Israel. In France, anti-Israel demonstrations led to assaults on synagogues and Jewish stores. We shouldn't be surprised that in a country like France, where BDS activists blocked the entrance of stores selling Israeli products, a hostile atmosphere was created for all who identify with Israel, especially the Jewish community. We all saw how this hostile atmosphere led a terrorist to enter the Hyper Kasher store, which sells many Israeli products, and murder 4 Jews in cold blood. Because when you delegitimize a country and a people, you basically legitimize violence against them. In South Africa, BDS activists, as you saw, stood outside an Israeli concert and sang, "Shoot the Jews." Right now, they are only singing, "Shoot the Jews." And we need to act before the words turn into bullets. We welcome the statements from many world leaders, from President Macron to Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Theresa May, from Chancellor Merkel to Prime Minister Trudeau and President Trump, condemning BDS and anti-Zionism as new forms of anti-Semitism. We applaud the German Parliament resolution, which explicitly notes that the arguments and methods of BDS are anti-Semitic and that its calls not to buy Israeli goods remind us of the Nazi boycott of Jews. We also applaud the resolution passed overwhelmingly by the US Congress, which strongly condemned BDS. Even the UN, a body which itself has often served as a platform for anti-Semitic rhetoric, has begun to express concern about this phenomenon. The report just published yesterday by the UN's Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief stresses that, and I quote, expression which draws upon anti-Semitic tropes or stereotypes rejects the right of Israel to exist or advocates discrimination against Jewish individuals because of their religion should be condemned. The report also notes that UN Secretary General Guterres has characterized attempts to delegitimize the right of Israel to exist, including calls for its destruction as a contemporary form of anti-Semitism. However, along with this important statement from world leaders, we need bold, practical steps. All democracies should follow the German parliament and adopt resolutions which explicitly recognize the connection between BDS and anti-Semitism. Even more importantly, governments and municipalities should officially adopt definitions of anti-Semitism which cover all forms which it takes today. These definitions should be used by authorities in areas such as prosecuting crimes, protecting Jewish communities, and preventing anti-Semitism from creeping into school curriculum, which is unfortunately happening. All democracies that value academic freedom must ensure the right of Jewish students to pursue their education free from the hostile environment created by BDS. And we must ensure that no public funds go to organizations or events which espouse BDS anti-Semitism. European taxpayers, don't let your money fund hate. Unfortunately, the current High Representative insisted that funding to BDS supporting organizations was legitimate, as long as the funding was not earmarked specifically and directly for BDS activities. This is absurd. We all know that money is fungible. High Representative Designate Borrell have to change this hypocritical and destructive policy. All funding for BDS supporting NGOs must stop until the NGOs stop promoting BDS, period. And BDS extremists linked to terror cannot be given a platform here in this parliament or in any parliament in any democracy. When Laila Khaled, the notorious PFLP terrorist and airplane hijacker, who now has become a spokeswoman and fundraiser for BDS, spoke in this building 2 years ago, I turned to then President Tajani and demanded that this be put to a stop.
We did this as well.
I know, and we appreciate, but let me tell you what happened later. President Tajani responded, now I understand with your help, that he had passed a decision to deny access to all members of terrorist organization. I welcomed this response. This is why I was extremely disappointed to see that just recently, again, 3 well-known BDS activists, Khaled Barakat, Muhammad Khatib, and Charlotte Cates, who have ties to the PFLP terrorist organization, spoke here in Parliament. Barakat, by the way, who is both a senior member of the PFLP terrorist organization and a BDS activist, has already been banned from speaking at political events in Germany, for example, but he still can speak here. Ladies and gentlemen, the European Parliament must not be used as a platform for anti-Semitism and terror, and we should all agree on that. Dear friends, each and every one of us has a special responsibility, a responsibility to the legacy of the past and to the promise of a tolerant and safe future. 70 years ago, 70 years after the hate and racism which made Auschwitz possible, new movements based on racism and hatred toward the other are threatening our cherished goal of unity in diversity. Some of these movements are openly racist, and some, as I explained, try to disguise their racism. BDS is trying to desensitize us to its racism. We have to wake up and act. In the last EU elections, the majority of Europe's citizens reaffirmed their commitment to unity in diversity and to tolerance. These are values that Europe and Israel share. But it's not enough to cherish these values. We must defend them. We have to expose the unholy trinity of BDS, anti-Semitism, and terror, because this trinity must be defeated. The State of Israel will continue to take all steps necessary to defend itself, and Europe must take all steps necessary to protect its Jewish citizens and its most basic values and identity. If we act now and work together, Europe, Israel, and all who are willing to defend our open and free societies, of course the United States of America, we can succeed. Thank you for being our partners in this fight. Thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Minister Erdem, thank you very much indeed. Now, Prodamosua, I would like to give the floor to Madame Katharina von Schnurbein, who is the EU coordinator for combating anti-Semitism.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, Excellencies, honorable members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, the nexus between ancient anti-Jewish tropes and the way in which Zionism, the Jewish movement for self-determination, or the State of Israel are being questioned is critical to understanding modern forms of anti-Semitism and what their impact is on Jewish Europeans. While medieval images, such as the blood libel or Jews poisoning wells, are widely regarded as anti-Semitic, portraying the same images on the Jewish state or Israel as a Jewish collectivity hold rather more currency in the media, in public, and in political discourse. Anti-Semitism can become normalized by the framing of the Jewish community as a proxy for the State of Israel. Together with the increasing threats of physical attacks, this has created an atmosphere in which Jews are leaving or thinking about leaving Europe. In our recent polls, 38% of Jewish Europeans said so. And whenever in the past Jews have thought about leaving Europe, it has been bad for Europe. Fighting anti-Semitism is therefore in everybody's interest and should not be seen as the responsibilities of Jews only. Acknowledging all forms of anti-Semitism as equally pernicious has been a prerequisite for our actions at European level. Therefore, it is crucial to make people understand where criticism of Israel crosses the line into anti-Semitism. This is particularly the case when Jewish communities are held responsible for the doings of the State of Israel. Similarly, this is the case when people question the right of existence of the State of Israel. During the Juncker Commission, the European Commission has stepped up its efforts to combat and prevent anti-Semitism. The challenges are plentiful, but we had no ostrich approach in the EU. To ensure evidence-based policy making, we not only listened to the Jewish communities, but also held surveys among Jews and among non-Jews about their perception of anti-Semitism. And while the perception of it is a bigger problem, of course, seen among the Jewish community, also 50%, every second European, sees anti-Semitism a problem in their country. The IRA definition that has already been mentioned has been adopted by EU institutions as a useful, non-legally binding tool to recognize anti-Semitism, including in a resolution by this House. In December 2018, all member states unanimously agreed a Council declaration agreeing to step up the fight against anti-Semitism. This has led to the creation of a working group where we bring together member state representatives and Jewish community leaders to discuss issues such as security, education, Holocaust remembrance, data collection on the basis of the IRA definition. The aim is for us that all member states by the end of 2020 adopt national strategies against anti-Semitism. While there has been progress made, a lot of challenges remain, and 9 out of 10 Jews in Europe today see anti-Semitism as their number one problem. There is certainly no time for complacency. The European Union has been firm on its position regarding the BDS movement. While it upholds international policy of clearly distinguishing between the territory of the State of Israel and the territories occupied by it since 1967, the EU rejects any attempt to isolate Israel and does not support calls for boycott. My focus today is the impact of the so-called BDS movement in Europe on Jewish communities, Jewish students, not the situation in the Middle East. It is fully legitimate to support the Palestinian aspirations. We all have the right to freedom of speech and freedom of expression. This includes criticism of the Israeli government in the occupied territories. In fact, many European Jews engage in activities in the hope to improve the situations of Palestinians on the ground. However, we need to be vigilant that this does not become an excuse to express or legitimize hatred against Jewish Europeans. We must be able to call out such statements as anti-Semitic. That is our right to freedom of expression. The anti-Israel BDS movement here in Europe, originating from some British universities in the early 2000s, can lead to an atmosphere where Jewish students are being held responsible for what Israel is doing, and they feel uncomfortable. As is the case with all forms of hatred and bigotry, the Commission follows a victim-centered approach also when analyzing BDS in Europe. In the recent survey by the Fundamental Rights Agency, where we polled 16,500 Jewish Europeans, 82% regarded BDS as anti-Semitic. But only 38% regarded criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic. It's important to understand that the Jewish community sees and makes a very clear distinction. We observe repercussions for Jews in regard to BDS activities, in particular on campuses, including physical attacks, taking down of mezuzahs. One prominent example is the targeting that was already mentioned of the American Jewish singer-songwriter Matisau in Spain, where BDS put him under pressure to renounce Israel, although he was an American citizen, or he is an American citizen. So to define the red line between criticism of the Israeli government and crossing into anti-Semitism, the IHRA definition has been helpful, and it is good to know that the Israeli government has also adopted this definition. It helps to define the point where political discourse slips into hate speech. On the one side, the IHRA definition states clearly that criticism of Israel, like that leveled against any other country, cannot be seen as anti-Semitic. On the other hand, it is clear that calling for the destruction of Israel is clearly anti-Semitic, even when it comes wrapped in the logic of human rights. Before concluding, allow me to shed some light on the legal situation regarding BDS in Europe. It is complex and it differs from member state to member state. The EU does not take a position with regards to the national laws. It is important to note that political declarations and resolutions have been passed into both directions. In France and Britain, legislation bans BDS from receiving public funding or premises is in force. The German Bundestag and many cities in Germany, like Frankfurt, Munich, Bonn, some universities, some parties, like the Green Party in Bavaria, for example, and organizations have adopted resolutions against BDS. However, on the other side, a court in Bonn ruled recently on 18 September 2019 that excluding a Palestinian organization from a cultural festival in Bonn on the account of its support for BDS constituted unequal treatment. At the same time, many city councils in Spain have passed pro-boycott resolutions, which are frequently challenged in court. So far, the courts have dismissed all such city council resolutions as being discriminatory, and there are about 50 such cases. So I think it's important to understand that the situation with regards to BDS and its legality in Europe is very different. To conclude, the European Commission is very much aware of the negative repercussions of BDS activities for Jewish students on campus and Jewish Europeans more generally in public spaces, where they become associated with all supposed conspiracy theories, becoming the Jewish lobby or a Zionist lobby, and where they become at risk to become ostracized by BDS. Unfortunately, I have to say, the report focuses only on the social media and on singular statements, rather than looking at the attacks in real life and the repercussions on Jewish Europeans. For example, we also saw a case, an attack on a Holocaust survivor during a talk at a university in Berlin. And we have seen several attacks on Jews following BDS activities in UK universities, respectively difficulties for them, for example, to create Jewish societies under the pretext of criticism of the Israeli government, where they are being British Jewish students and don't hold Israeli citizenship. First Vice President Timmermans and Commissioner Jourova have been very clear that no conflict, and I quote, no conflict anywhere in the world justifies violence in Europe. We have always said that the word is our strongest weapon in the fight against anti-Semitism. We must speak